In my last video, I defended Nintendo against accusations that they are uniquely evil, greedy, and anti-consumer by referring to these 9 points, though I did skip number 2. I also basically defended these prices, though I do personally wish they were lower. Here in this video, I'm going to respond to point 2, but before I do, let me explain why I skipped it. I wrote this section of the video that briefly deals with piracy before I came up with the numbered list structure of the video. I wrote this stuff first. Then, when the time came to write the response to number 2, which would happen earlier in the video, I realized I would have to rewrite the entire video in order for it to make sense. It was already taking me long enough to write this response because, in order to properly tackle the issue, I'd have to talk about piracy again, and ownership versus licensing, physical copies versus digital copies, the Ubisoft lawsuit involving the crew, legal and illegal mods and homebrews, and Nintendo bricking consoles. And all of this would have made the video much longer than what I was aiming for. Though I have heard some people complain about the empty game cards, the vast majority of the complaints I've heard about the Switch 2 in games are about the prices. So, because of this fact, and the fact that it was taking me so long to write this response, I didn't think it would be that big of a deal if I skipped it. But now, my detractors are trying to use the fact that I skipped it to make the claim that I didn't make a single valid argument in the entire video at all, which is disingenuous, bad faith bullshit. All of a sudden, because I didn't respond to it, it's the most important topic of our times. People are just trying to use this as an excuse to avoid dealing with the actual arguments. I have made a few contentious videos in my short YouTube career. I fully expect to get hate and insults from people who disagree with me. And these people are easily dismissed because anyone who would level insults instead of arguments is someone I don't need to pay attention to. Anyone calling me a simp or Nintendo cocksucker or a shill is just showing themselves to be incapable of actually engaging with the content of the video. Unfortunately, it's not just the people throwing insults that are failing to engage with the arguments. This is the worst thing about making YouTube videos. Responding to the comments oftentimes means repeating myself because of comments like this, where this person is just repeating a grievance that they had before the video as if I didn't address it in the video itself. How can Nintendo not be greedy pricing the game so high? As I said before, you don't know how much these games cost to produce, and just because these games aren't photorealistic doesn't mean they're inexpensive to make. This comment that I made in the original video still stands. There hasn't been a single legitimate attempt to rebut it, just the same old assertions that the price is too high. This absolute moron thinks that one $40 game selling 1 million copies is enough to cover all development costs with plenty left over for cars, houses, yachts, and women. Because that's how every Nintendo employee rolls. This is fucking ridiculous. The only way you can make this claim is if you know exactly how much these games cost to produce. Even then, all of the money they spend needs to be made back before the game sees any profit. Specifically about Mario Kart World, it wasn't until I was uploading the video that we learned this game has been in development for 8 years. 8 years worth of salaries for God knows how many members of that development team. Think about how much money Nintendo may have already spent on this game, speculating that that money will come back to them. To claim that you know better than Nintendo what the price of this game should be is a level of arrogance I could never hope to achieve in my lifetime. Especially when, really, the only claim you're putting forward that the game should be cheaper is the simple fact that you want it to be.
And remember, you wanted this.
Some game cards have no game data on them. There is a download key on the card so you can download the game to your machine, but it's not a one-time use key, and you'll need the cartridge in your machine to play your game. You won't be able to play the game without the card. Theoretically, then, you could trade these games with your friends if you have any, and possibly in stores. I'm not sure about that one. The argument for this is that cartridges can be expensive to produce, and having low storage cards with download keys on them will allow indie developers with less money to get their games on store shelves without having to pay for high storage cards. Also, bigger third-party developers will be less inclined to abandon Nintendo the way they did during the N64 era because of expensive cartridges. Nintendo, for the foreseeable future, will be using these high storage cards. There will be physical and digital versions of their games. These empty game cards are just an option for third-party developers as a way of keeping development costs down. The argument against this is that at some point these games will be removed from servers. So if you have one of these game cards and your game data becomes corrupt, you won't be able to play the game because the data isn't on the card itself and there's no way you can download the game from. In the last video, I said this. So what do you do now? You steal. Every time this guy releases a video about Nintendo, the comments are full of people saying, "Oh, these prices are so high, I'm being driven to piracy." And people make the game preservation argument to defend this piracy. Or they'll say, don't get me wrong, there is such a thing as game preservation, which isn't just piracy, it's people wanting to keep the games that they've bought playable for as long as possible. Not having physical copies of full games makes real game preservation very difficult. Note that I said physical copies of full games. On the PS3, 4, and 5, I've been buying games strictly digital for years now. I was aware of the fact that since the PS4 generation, all the game data on the disc would copy to the hard drive because the PS4 could run games faster from the internal hard drive than it could from the Blu-ray, and that the game disc would have to be in the machine to confirm the purchase. And of course, you'd get these huge day one patches that I just thought were updates for the game that were made during the brief window between the game disc being made and shipped to stores and any release day purchase. I was unaware of the fact that Sony and Microsoft have both been selling discs with incomplete data for years, and the discs, like the cartridges, are only used to confirm the purchase. I guess this really is just another one of those things that only Nintendo gets shit on for doing. Let me be more clear. Though Sony has done the empty disc thing, most of the time, their release day copies contain the 1.0 version of the game. They're usually fully playable, but in some cases, a day one patch is needed to add bug fixing and some small amount of missing content. Microsoft does the empty disk thing much more often and has been doing it for years. So, fuck Microsoft too, right? I never owned a Wii or a Wii U, so I had been outside of the Nintendo ecosystem for years until I bought a Switch 1, and I had been unfamiliar with how they ran their eShops. There was some controversy a couple of years ago about Nintendo shutting down purchases from the 3DS and Wii U eShops. People cried about losing access to their games, but as of writing this video, downloads of purchased games are still available. This seems to be a common thing with Nintendo. They'll have an eShop for a console. That eShop will shut down purchases at some point a few years after the console lifecycle, and then game downloads will end at some point years after that. You're worried about losing access to the games you've purchased. I understand that. It would be better for consumers who want to do real game preservation, and not just piracy, to have full physical copies of games with complete game data. But if Nintendo sticks to this 15-year time span of download availability, that's plenty of time for you to back up your games. With the Switch 1, and hopefully the Switch 2 as well, backing up your games is as simple as connecting your SD card to your PC and dragging and dropping files. All you have to do is make sure you're keeping your backups current with your latest game updates. I was going to talk about the Ubisoft lawsuit involving the crew here, but it's a very annoying topic, so I'm just going to skip it. I don't think it's truly reasonable to expect anything and everything you buy to last forever. It might be okay to want that as a hypothetical, but it's not practical to expect. Wear and tear, the ravages of time, pretty much everything you buy is going to break down at some point. How many things have you bought over the years do you still own? There's not a single game that I've owned that I bought for the Nintendo or Super Nintendo that I still own. Those games and consoles are in a landfill somewhere. Maybe you care more about retro gaming than I do, but that still doesn't matter. If you buy a game digitally, that console, that SD card, that internal or external hard drive will eventually wear out. Maybe if you buy the game physically on disc or cartridge, it'll last longer and you won't have to deal with the removal of download accessibility. But even then, no matter how well you take care of these things, they will wear out too. And if your SD card fails and your Switch fails and your PC fails all at the same time, then them's the breaks, kid. I don't know what to tell you. Shit happens. If you lose all your originals and your copies, then you'll just have to repurchase. And if you can't find a retro gaming store or all the online sellers are selling at ridiculous collector's prices, well, then I guess you just don't get to play the game anymore. Such is life. There is no law of the universe dictates you must be able to play a game forever. But I think we all know what you'll end up doing. Let's examine the legality of emulation. I'll have to do this in chart form. It is actually legal, in most Western countries at least, to download and install emulators. Do you own the console? Yes. Do you own the game? Yes. Have you ripped the game data from your own cartridge or disc? Yes. Is this legal? In most Western countries, yes. Do you own the console? Yes. Do you own the game? Yes. Have you ripped the data from your own cartridge or disc? No, because you either don't know how to or couldn't be bothered. Is this legal? No, because you downloaded an unlicensed copy. Some would consider this a gray area, but this is technically still piracy. The next scenario is that you own either the game or the console. You own one of them. If you don't own the game, you obviously haven't ripped the data yourself and are playing an unlicensed copy. Much less gray, this is piracy. And finally, you don't own anything. Definitely piracy, and piracy is illegal. I once saw someone online say, how can you steal something that is abundant? If you walked onto a large private apple orchard and you took a bunch of apples, the abundance of those apples doesn't make it any less of a theft. The same principle applies to digital products. The term piracy originally referred to robbing ships at sea. Now it includes unauthorized copying and distribution of media like movies, music, and games. Back in the day, people used to duplicate VHS tapes and sell them on street corners. Just because the internet has made piracy easier doesn't make it okay. Every bootleg copy sold is money that doesn't go to the movie makers. And I don't want to hear, these people have enough money. How rich would you have to be before you think it would be okay for somebody to rob you? Technically, piracy isn't theft or stealing because no physical object is taken. But in everyday language, people refer to it as theft or stealing because it does take something of value for free against the wishes of the creator. When you pirate these games, you're not stealing a disc or cartridge, but you are depriving people of income. And these people would use that income to pay their bills, feed their families, and make more of the stuff we like. This guy would say piracy is not stealing because the potential profit that they could have made is just potential, not actual. So you don't steal money. And he also gives some arguments involving theft of property. But the reason why that potential income never becomes actual is because you pirated instead of paying. If I ran a paid digital service and you circumvent the paywall to gain access for free, you haven't physically taken money from me, but you still owe me money because you have stolen the service. Whether it be a subscription to games, movies, or music, or a service that does your taxes, or even ghost writes your video essays, bypassing the paywall is unauthorized access. A court might not call that theft, but they will call it a DMCA violation, copyright infringement, breach of contract, fraud, theft of services. And the consequences range from civil to criminal, depending on the case. You might not like the industry shift from physical ownership to licensed digital downloads, but the idea that if buying isn't owning, then piracy isn't stealing is a non sequitur. It's not a real statement of fact, it's just a sloppy excuse for theft of service through piracy. You're not sticking it to the man, you're just showing your ass. You might think that pirating from Nintendo is morally justifiable because they're so evil. But you cede the moral high ground as soon as you do so. The best thing to do, if you really want to protest Nintendo's business practices, is just not buy their stuff. Right now, you might be thinking, well, the outcome is the same if I don't buy or if I pirate. Nintendo doesn't get my money either way. But from Nintendo's perspective, piracy as a form of protesting their nefarious business practices is indistinguishable from piracy done out of simple greed. What message are you trying to send? This guy asks me about pirating old games. If you really think old games should be freely available, then what you're going to have to do is make the legal argument that there is some inherent value in having video games enter the public domain decades earlier than other media. This is your only option, and it will never work. Games have many layers of copyright, code, music, voice acting, art, writing. You'd have to convince all these copyright holders to give up their copyright decades earlier than they would have to for other media. It's a losing struggle. I don't give a shit is the answer to this question, as I said in the other video. If there is some old ass game that nobody profits from anymore, and there's no other way than emulation for you to play it, then I don't really give a shit, but don't pretend like you're doing anything noble. I only give a fuck about piracy insofar as people make terrible arguments to defend it. Technically, there is no argument to defend it because the idea that a thing I want is too expensive, so I'm just going to steal it, can never be morally justified. I guess I do also care about piracy of new games, not so much old games, because piracy of new games does affect profit. And the less profit a company makes, the less games they make, the less games we get as consumers. And this idea that I saw some dumbass on YouTube say about a year ago that if people don't get paid to make Nintendos, people will just make Nintendos for free because people love making Nintendo. This is just fucking bullshit, man. Some people are just weird when it comes to money, but I'll talk about that later. Anyway, personally, I don't give a shit about retro gaming because I was there. I was alive and gaming when most of these games you people want to play so much first came out. There's really only one old game I go back to and play on a regular basis, and that's Legend of the Mystical Ninja. Other than that, I tend not to play games more than 2 generations old. I have my cousin's Nintendo 64 and some games in a bag in my closet, and not once have I ever been tempted to dust them off and fire them up. And my cousin's not playing them because A, they're in my closet, and B, he's been dead 15 years. If you really care that much about retro gaming, then pirate old games all day. But if you get caught mass distributing pirated software and Nintendo or any other copyright holder decides to fuck you, they are well within their legal right to do so. There are ways to do game preservation legally, and I have no problem with that. My main problem is when you lie about your motivations. You complain about restrictions on pirating old games and the lack of physical copies for new games, yet people have been posting YouTube videos of pirated gameplay from games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and Mario Odyssey, since those games were released, and they still are. All of those games, by the way, are still available for purchase in physical form. And we'll see how long it takes before Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza pirated gameplay gets posted, those games again having physical copies. Every once in a while, I'll come across someone saying, well, it runs better on my Steam Deck anyway. And such a person is a cunt. But at least this person is an honest cunt rather than a lying cunt, like the people putting forward these justifications. There's a difference between ability and right. You have the ability to pirate, you don't have the right. Piracy is a form of theft and has no moral justification. Therefore, you can't cry about the cost of living or make any other excuse to justify doing it. You are not Robin Hood. You are not stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family. You are just a spoiled asshole who wants a thing but doesn't want to pay for it. You are morally no different than any shoplifter, but you are more of a coward because at least they have the balls to risk getting tackled by some flashlight cop. I'm not even telling you not to pirate. I truly don't give a fuck if you do. I only care that you're lying to me and to yourself about why you do it. You just want shit for free. Edit. I forgot 2 important points, and now I don't have time to talk about them. Number 1, Nintendo themselves could be held liable if they knew about piracy and didn't do anything about it. And number 2, people don't like always online DRM or console bricking, which I'll talk about next, and they'll point to these things to justify piracy, but these things only exist because of piracy. So once again, you're mad at the wrong people. You're mad at Nintendo for defending themselves against piracy, but you're not mad at the people stealing from them. There was a time when consoles weren't online. Being online gives us certain benefits: game updates and patches, console updates and patches, DLC, the option of digital distribution for smaller developers, online multiplayer. The cons are online multiplayer because fuck people, unfinished games, always online DRM, server shutdowns and digital games disappearing, EULA fuckery and data collection. People don't like the idea that Nintendo reserves the right to brick our consoles, and neither do I, but that's the world we live in now. I own this car. It's mine. I bought it with my own money. Therefore, I should be able to do whatever I want with it, including driving on the sidewalk. I know you don't like that analogy because it's physical, but that doesn't matter. The analogy still stands because you can't do anything you want with a product just because you own it if the anything you want to do is illegal. There are legal and illegal reasons to mod your console. I could see someone modding a PS5 Pro to run Blender, for example. Nintendo might brick your console on purpose or by accident, but why would that happen? The chances of Nintendo bricking the console of someone completely undeserving, someone who has not tampered with the console at all, are infinitesimally small. The way I see it, you mod your console to run pirated software, and Nintendo bricks your console on purpose, you got just punishment for your crime. You're not going to jail, you just got to buy a new console. If you mod your console to cheat in online play, then maybe they should have just banned your account first. But let's be honest, if you're modding to cheat online, you're probably a pirate too.
You don't think you should be punished for all of this?
Just a little bit, no video games for a whole weekend.
If Nintendo bricks your console accidentally because your illegal homebrew caused compatibility issues, then that was a risk you took when you fucked with the console. You should have anticipated this possible outcome. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Or, according to an old Jamaican saying my father taught me, or maybe he just made it up, who knows? Mongoose say, can't take a chance, can't be a man. If you do something to your console, legal or illegal, that causes Nintendo, or Sony or Microsoft, to brick your console by accident or on purpose, that's your fault, not Nintendo's or Sony's or Microsoft. Remember, Sony and Microsoft have all this same anti-consumerist language in their EULAs as well. You took a chance when you modded your console. Now you gotta be a man and deal with the consequences. Some people have had their Switch 2s bricked already because they've used something called a MIG switch. It's basically a cartridge-shaped SD card reader which can be used to run games directly from an SD card. Those games might be your illegal rips of purchased games, or they might be pirated software. Either way, Nintendo can't tell the difference. When it comes right down to it, the simple fact is that the vast majority of the people using this device or modding their console in any way are doing so to run pirated software. You know they can brick your shit, but you do it anyway because you think you can get away with it. And then you have the balls to complain about the stupid prize you won. I'm going to say this again because it bears repeating. Nintendo cannot differentiate between piracy and homebrew if they both use the same exploits and system modifications. They don't have any way to know your intent. If you look like a pirate, you're going to get treated like one. I recently read about someone getting their console bricked for playing a game they bought secondhand from Facebook Marketplace. People are now crying, Nintendo won't even let us play used games now? Trading or selling used games or any other product you legally own is protected by something called the first sale doctrine or exhaustion of rights doctrine, depending on where you live. You have the right to do whatever you want with whatever you own, so long as what you're doing is legal. And if you want to relinquish your right to use a product to someone else through making a sale or a trade, you have every right to do that. In the case of video games, the first sale or exhaustion of rights doctrine does not allow you to make an unauthorized copy of the game so that you can keep on playing it after the sale, which is what happened in this case. The seller dumped the cart data before the sale, so now, from Nintendo's perspective, 2 identical copies of the exact same cartridge are being played by 2 different Switches at the same time, so they bricked the second player. They unbricked his Switch as soon as the guy contacted Nintendo and explained the situation. You people just seem to want Nintendo to do nothing to protect themselves from piracy, which is all they've done here. This is just another example of Nintendo protecting their IP and copyright. The methods Nintendo has to do this are going to be imperfect, but it's the pirate's fault if you catch a stray, not Nintendo's. There's a constant tension between the consumer and the provider. The buyer wants to buy for as little as possible, or at least as much as they think is reasonable. The seller wants to sell for as much as possible, or at least as much as they can justify. I don't know who has more power here. I'm sure that there are market forces I don't know about as a non-economist. You, as a consumer, you want things to be a certain way. You have your preferences. The seller also has preferences, and who gets their way depends on a number of factors, but the buyer and the seller will always end up meeting somewhere in the middle. It doesn't feel that way to many consumers because many consumers are just dumb. They're incapable of seeing things from other people's perspective. You may not feel as though the seller is compromising, but they are. The seller has a hard limit on how far they can drop prices based on the total cost to make the item. The buyer is more varied. There are rich people and poor people and everywhere in between. If Nintendo makes a product that 90, 80, or even 70% of the public can afford, and if they're taking a loss or nearly taking a loss on that product in hopes that they'll make up that loss with software sales, how can we call that greed? This guy is all throughout my comments saying that Nintendo is evil and greedy and predatory. He's hating on Nintendo in the exact same unhinged and crazy way I alluded to in the last video. Nintendo needs to be taken down as many pegs as possible, or has a long history of poor actions and hostility towards consumers' rights. They've been getting more and more unhinged for years upon years with zero accountability and want to act like a government. I asked him for some examples. He hasn't gotten back to me yet and probably never will. When I do get examples of Nintendo being anti-consumer, it's almost always just examples of Nintendo protecting their IP and brand image. Japan doesn't have the legal concept of fair use in their law. YouTube Let's Plays might be covered in the West by fair use, but they're not in Japan. So Nintendo has the legal right to DMCA them, though they seem to have relaxed on Let's Plays in recent years. Fan remakes or fan fiction games are not covered by fair use at all, and Nintendo has the legal right to protect their IP and brand image. Suppose a fan remake secretly slips some Rule 34 nonsense into the game. Even if they don't, suppose some small percentage of the fan base mistakenly believes a low-quality fan remake is officially licensed by Nintendo. The existence of these games might dilute the brand. Before you say consumers are smarter than that, how many times did we hear about the Wii U branding not being clear enough and confused moms might not know what to buy? The Switch 2 is called the Switch 2 to denote the fact that it's a brand new console, yet I still see comments like this one from IGN. Japanese law is very strict on copyright, not just for the violator, but for the holder as well. A company has to be seen as vigorously defending its copyright, or a Japanese court might consider this lack of action to be a waiver. A company has abandoned their copyright. If too many people are using the IP, a court might think that the IP has lost distinctiveness. I said this in a previous video. Why do a fan remake or fan fiction game anyway? Why not make something of your own? If you really want to pay homage to your favorite video game franchise, it's possible to get away with fan fiction by making it legally distinct. You could always make a game in the same genre as the game you love, just change the names of the characters and locations, redesign some of the costumes and tools. Or is it that you have the technical knowledge of how to use Blender or Unreal, but you lack true creativity? I refuse to buy the notion that a company like Nintendo could ever be abusive or predatory. Greedy, possibly. Underhanded, maybe. But abusive or predatory, absolutely no, because not having their products isn't a threat to your life or livelihood. The farmer bro, Martin Shkreli, who I name dropped in the previous video, he bought a life-saving drug and raised the price 5,500%. That is what abuse and predation looks like. He's directly making money from people's desire to stay alive. The way Nintendo makes money hurts no one. And no, the people they sue for stealing from them don't count. You call Nintendo greedy, but you're stealing from them out of want, not need. How is that not greed? As far as any other examples of anti-consumer behavior from Nintendo, there's not one that hasn't also been done by either Sony or Microsoft. Again, read the EULAs. They also reserve the right to brick consoles and block lawsuits. My brother posted a link to my video in the Nintendo Voice Chat Facebook group. There are people there saying that I'm making fun of poor people. My father was a baker for a supermarket chain. My mother was a lunch lady. I too have a bullshit-ass job. I come from working class people, and I am working class. My goal was not to make fun of the poors, though I don't really care if you were offended.
Witcha Broke Ass.
I just thought this clip was funny. My point with these two videos is that every single time I get an example of how Nintendo is uniquely evil and greedy and corrupt and anti-consumer, every single example given, except maybe number 4, is something that Sony and Microsoft are also guilty of. I do sometimes hear people complain when others do them, but I don't hear them complain with the same vigor. When Nintendo does these things, they exemplify Nintendo's villainy. But when Microsoft or Sony do these things, they're seen as isolated events. They're just individual instances of bad behavior from otherwise okay companies. I'm not trying to defend Nintendo doing these things. I don't like it when any company does this stuff, though I do think some of these things aren't that big of a deal. My only claim is that people have been hating on Nintendo for decades in ways that are weird, nonsensical, psychotic, and ludicrous. And in the age of the internet, they've brought that lunacy online. Nintendo isn't exceptional in the doing of these things. And on April 2nd, when I started hearing people online complaining about pricing, it just sounded to me like more of the same old Nintendo hate that I've been hearing for years. The Nintendo anti-fans, that is, Sony fanboys, Xbox fanboys, PC elitists, they're at it again, trying to turn industry-wide problems into a stick to beat Nintendo with. You might think I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but I think picking sides and joining camps in the console fanboy flame wars is dumb. I go where the games are, which is why I own a Switch 2, PS5, and gaming PC. All I ask is that you bring this same energy to Sony and Microsoft.
Witcha Broke Ass.
Some people just don't understand how optional video games are. They say entertainment is important for our mental health. I agree with this, but there's lots of different forms of entertainment out there. You can read a book, watch a movie, jerk off, hang out with friends. It doesn't have to be only the one thing. But running with this logic, you think video games are important to our mental health and well-being.
Yes.
They help us unwind at the end of a long day and deal with the mundane drudgery of life.
Yes.
So you wouldn't mind paying a premium for them.
Yes. Well.
I am going to do some direct comment responses, but first, I want to talk about the dumbest genre of comment that I've gotten under the last video. I hear horror stories about some companies mistreating their employees, terrible working conditions at Amazon warehouses or Tesla factories, anime animators sleeping under their desks to meet deadlines. In the realm of video games, there have been stories about hostile working environments and crunch, which is basically forced overtime, at companies like Bethesda and Naughty Dog. There has been a certain kind of person complaining about Nintendo since April 2nd, and they never cite Nintendo doing stuff like this. I'm not saying Nintendo has never done this type of stuff. I don't know if they have. But that's not where these people's complaints lie. Their chief complaint is money. The Switch 2 console and games are overpriced, and Nintendo is evil and greedy and anti-consumer because the Switch 2 console and games are overpriced. They might talk about console bricking and such, but when you rebut these arguments, these people, they don't give arguments in response. No, they just tell you not to defend a billion-dollar company. These people, like the guy I referenced earlier who said that people would make Nintendos for free because they really like it, these people just hate money. And they think the only way to make a significant amount of money is by hurting people. The more money you have, the more bodies left in your wake. That's their heuristic. That's the prism through which they see the world. Nintendo is rich, therefore Nintendo is evil, because you have to be evil to become rich. They think Nintendo has made enough money. They don't need to make any more. They have made so much money, they should just start giving consoles and games away for free or pricing them so low that they put themselves out of business. They don't seem to understand that it is possible for even a billion-dollar company to go bankrupt, or maybe they just don't care. These people, they see these numbers and they immediately assume the worst possible motivations on the part of Nintendo. They don't think about the upfront costs, the money Nintendo has already spent making these games and consoles. And by the way, the console development cycle never ends. Right now, at Nintendo HQ, there's a team of researchers speculating on what the next Nintendo console will look like. If it cost, all told, $400 to make each console. Then 5 million consoles, which is about the number of consoles Nintendo might make for a launch, that would cost about $2 billion. And you would have Nintendo do that for free? You want Nintendo to open up a fucking Patreon? You want Nintendo to give out $2 billion worth of consoles on spec? These people really do believe that if a company makes any kind of profit, that's anti-consumer. That if a company makes a product for a total of $5, they should sell it for $5. They seem to want a company to operate at break-even pricing at all times. They don't take into consideration the need for a company to have savings or to make a profit for reinvestment or R&D or to expand the business. I worked in an ice cream parlor when I was younger. That business was much more profitable in the summer than the winter. In fact, what they made in the summer probably carried them through the winter to some degree. Some things are just seasonal in that way. There are downturns that a company can survive, but probably wouldn't if they operated at break-even pricing. Basically, the short version is that anyone telling me I shouldn't defend Nintendo because they're a billion-dollar company is a clown. I understand you think you're making a point, but you're not. The fact that Nintendo is a billion-dollar company doesn't say anything about whether or not the arguments I made in my video are correct. What you're doing is called a non sequitur. Feel free to make an actual argument as to why I'm wrong in the comments below. It's not even about defending Nintendo specifically. It's not about whether or not they're going to give me something. It's about countering the illogical bullshit that's been all through my social media feeds since April 2nd. You people are using broken logic and faulty reasoning to argue that Nintendo should do things that would see them bankrupt themselves, all because you can't do basic math. Some of you didn't believe me when I said that Nintendo has had sales of first-party games. Okay, here's an article talking about a Nintendo sale from a couple of years ago. If you follow the embedded video to Nintendo's UK YouTube channel, you can find a bunch of videos detailing sales, many of which are first-party games. They don't do these sales enough, I think. It doesn't look like they've had one of these sales in a while, which is unfortunate. Also, they've discontinued the 84-pound vouchers. Maybe, hopefully, they'll bring them back. Maybe they'll do some Switch 2 specific vouchers for 100 pounds or something. Edit, these things are gone. No more Switch vouchers. No Switch vouchers, no Switch 2 vouchers. It's unfortunate, you know. I appreciate a good sale as much as anyone else, but oh well. Oh, look, my brother sent me a link to the American Nintendo store, and there's a sale on right now. Well, not right now for when this video goes up, but this was recent, so here's your proof, okay? I want to go over some of the more idiotic things said in the comments. For this first one, I want you to remember, I'm defending Nintendo by saying that they're not uniquely evil and that we don't know enough about production costs to claim that Nintendo's being greedy. The prices of the games was something that one of the three major companies were going to do anyway, and I don't know enough about production costs to say that the console is overpriced, but defending them is absolutely stupid. So he agrees with the points I'm defending Nintendo on, but still thinks it's stupid to defend Nintendo because Nintendo has been extremely anti-consumer, which I've already addressed, and they didn't innovate with this console. Which is just some bullshit meme a guy who used to work for Sony came up with. You know, Nintendo, they used to be so innovative, but they just didn't do that with this. It's a backhanded compliment, right? This guy, he's working for the enemy and he's talking shit. He's an op, right? It's not a real point. Also, Nintendo doesn't need to innovate with every single console. This time they went with more power, and it is more powerful than this basically a Switch Pro bullshit. What does a next-gen console do? And I want you to remember this for later. It plays games the previous model can't and is much more powerful. The PS5 is 5 to 6 times more powerful than the PS4, and it plays games the PS4 can't. The PS4 Pro is only 2 to 3 times as powerful as the base PS4, and they play all the same games. And the PS5 Pro is between 1 and 2 times as powerful as the base PS5, and they play all the same games. Not only does the Switch 2 play games the Switch 1 can't, it's 10 times more powerful. So it's incredibly stupid to claim it's just a Switch Pro. One pro Nintendo video. One. And that makes this channel a Nintendo fanboy channel. Ridiculous. Also, this person does not understand human nature. People are inherently negative. There's way more money to be made right now hating on Nintendo than defending them. All these anti-Nintendo videos you've seen since April 2nd, all these people now own Switch 2s. And half of these motherfuckers have already made a why I regret buying the Switch 2 videos, some of them less than 24 hours after launch. Maybe you're confused because you finally happened upon a YouTube channel where the guy running it doesn't lie for money. All these people are grifters and they're milking your dumbasses dry. Slavery is when you have the option to buy a thing but don't want to because it costs a bit more than you'd like. This comment starts out with some meaningless assertions and then makes the claim that saying the PS4 Pro is a waste of money and comparing to the Switch 2 is beyond me. Why exactly can't I make this comparison? Do people not compare consoles all the time? From what I've heard, the Switch 2 is slightly more powerful than the PS4 in terms of raw power, but the fact that it's made of modern components and will use modern rendering techniques puts it well over the top. So this assertion that the specs are equivalent to a 2010 gaming laptop is a joke. Edit, according to this developer, it's actually on par with the Xbox Series S. So you provided points that contradicted yourself. It's laughable. Switch 2 is not suffering a loss because they have profits elsewhere besides Japan. Did you even read the Reddit post? My dude, did you? How far down this Reddit thread do I have to scroll before I find a comment that agrees with you that isn't then immediately rebutted by the response to it? Most estimates I've seen say the Switch 2 is not making money. I saw one that said Nintendo might be making $4 per console. The rest of this comment is also just bullshit assertions. These are some of the most ridiculous takes I've ever heard. Some people will skip the pack-in, so let's not include it at all. Let's listen to what I actually did say. Number 1, Nintendo charging for the welcome tour. Yeah, this is silly. It's basically just a tech demo. Probably should have been free, but it doesn't cost that much. And if it were packed in, how many of you would have actually played this for any length of time? It's a nothing game. It's barely a game. If you want it, you pay a pittance for it. And if you don't want it, you're not missing anything. Sounds kind of different to me. Bro, this thing shows you all the new features of the console. Most people want to know what their fancy new machine can do. Is there no other way to learn features, like the internet maybe? Did anyone skip the Wii Sports pack-in? Wii Sports was an actual game. Did anyone skip the Mario Duck Hunt pack-in? Mario was an actual game. Do you have any idea how long I owned a PS5 before I played that Astrobot pack-in for like 5 minutes and never played it again? Even if they skip it, charging for it is insane. I clearly said that charging for it was a bad idea. I'm sure many people skip the Astrobot pack-in. Then what the fuck? What are we arguing about here? You should be agreeing with me. But because of that pack-in, that studio was allowed to work on their passion project and got rewarded with high praise and fucking hippie bullshit. But you know, the rest of your video was annoying or whatever, so I won't even get into it. See how terrible of an argument that is? Yes, I see how terrible your argument is. Also, what does the word fanboy mean to you? I think skipping 2 whole console generations and not playing any Nintendo games for about 12 years proves how unbiased I can be. This guy claims Nintendo was afraid to tell us the prices, but the prices were up on the website immediately after the Direct, and Nintendo never shows prices in Directs anyway. So this guy claims that Nintendo has already admitted that the higher prices are not because of inflation. He's referring to an interview with Doug Bowser. Doug Bowser is a salesman for Nintendo. He's like Nintendo's version of this guy. This guy's pitching Sony, Doug Bowser's pitching Nintendo. Of course, he's going to be like, we at Nintendo believe that the level of expertise brought to the development of our products by such great minds as this guy and this guy justify the greater expense. The level of care and craftsmanship, the heart and soul that they pour into. Of course, he's going to give you the salesman spiel. You know what I mean? He's not going to run out there like, listen, guys, we had to raise prices, okay? It's because of inflation. He's not going to do that, you know? He's not going to beg you to buy. He's going to try to convince you to buy. It's his job. And he's nowhere near as good at it as Reggie was. I'm sorry, bud, but as a longtime viewer of your vids, this was one of your worst yet. Let's look at the end. Again, I'm a fan of your videos, Clint, but this one was surprisingly horrible. Hope you don't think you're above constructive feedback. Normally, I see a comment like this. I think that this person is trying to insulate themselves from criticism. Now, if I disagree with him, whatever I say, no matter how well reasoned, can be dismissed by saying, I guess you couldn't take constructive feedback after all. But I do recognize this guy's name from comments on other videos, so while putting this out there as a possibility, I'm not actually accusing him of doing this. That being said, there's not much in the way of constructive feedback here. You completely sidestep the real reason why $90 for Breath of the Wild is facing backlash. It's the fact that the upgrade doesn't include all DLC that people think is scummy. Sony, Microsoft never do this. Anytime you pay to upgrade to a next-gen version, you get all included DLC. You simply can't defend Nintendo's practice of charging $90 for the full experience 8 years post-launch. In my defense, at the time of writing that response, there was some confusion as to who would be paying what for Breath of the Wild Switch 2 Edition and other Switch 1 game upgrades. Some people really did think it was going to be $90 for everyone, including those who already own the game on Switch 1. The fact that Sony and Microsoft include DLC in with these type of upgrades, normally I'd say, fuck what Sony and Microsoft do, Nintendo should be judged on their own merit and past actions. But I suppose you do have to look at an aggregate of actions from players across the industry to come up with an industry standard. Again, I say, bring this same energy to Sony and Microsoft. Anyway, it probably would have been a good idea to pack the DLC in with the full game at no extra cost. But why should they have done that? I guess this is an existential question. Why should Nintendo lower their prices over time? What law of the universe dictates that these prices must go down? I'm not sure this guy would appreciate having his comment pressed into the service of defending myself and Nintendo like this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Responding to my point that Nintendo doesn't drop game prices over time, this guy says, they do. In the past, they always have, by putting out Nintendo Selects, or putting a game out in a new package with another game, etc. The Switch generation was different because of inflation. The OG Switch would be around $400 today because of inflation, and so games like Breath of the Wild would be almost $80 today. So staying at $60 over an 8-year period, when there was such significant inflation during that period, is a price drop. This is a thing that most people don't want to understand about inflation. Breath of the Wild is now £44.95 on Amazon. When I bought it from Amazon at launch, it was £46, with whatever this deal was. The Champion's Ballad DLC is now $16.79 on Amazon. At release, it was $17.99. Put these numbers together, you get $61.74 for the full game right now on Switch 1, or around £84 for the original price with inflation. What I'm about to say right now is something that many of you are going to reject immediately, not because it's not true, but because you don't like it. It is true, but you would prefer it not to be. Here it is. If something was $50 10 years ago, it would be over $67 now with inflation. By keeping it at $50 over a 10-year period, this is, in effect, a passive discount. If someone doesn't understand that fact, then they are just fundamentally misunderstanding the concept of inflation. And if any of you are in my comments right now telling me how wrong I am, you're only disputing this fact because you want not to believe it. You want it to not be true. Nintendo doesn't put things in bargain bins, is what you should be arguing, and this is a good thing, not a bad thing. It helps games and the media and the industry maintain its value. If every game came out at 70 and then dropped to 45 in 3 weeks, then 15 within 6 months, the whole industry would collapse. That's basically what happened in 1983. When I bought Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone, those games had been out for a couple of years, and I got them on a steep sale, about £12 each. I played them, and I liked them well enough, but I'm glad I bought them on sale because I didn't think that they were good enough to justify, for me personally, paying full price for them. Those games were just okay. The writer and creative director of Days Gone, John Garvin, said that if you love a game and want a sequel, you should buy it at full fucking price. Kind of a strange thing to say because you can't know you love a game until after you play it, but okay. I doubt much of the £12 I spent on his game made its way into his pockets. People seem to want some justification for Nintendo selling Breath of the Wild at full price 8 years after launch beyond the simple fact that Nintendo wants it that way, or that it's Nintendo's prerogative. The reason a company would drop prices on older products is because, generally, people don't want to buy old stuff. The company wants to appeal to people who would otherwise not buy the item. People have this perception that an item or a product loses its value over time. A car, for example, might drop to 80% of its full value over an 8-year period, but that's most likely because it's used. But if you buy a brand new copy of Breath of the Wild in 2025, especially if you buy the digital version, that copy isn't worn out or used in the same way that a car would be. A new player gets the same experience in current year that I did in 2017. The game is new for you. 8 years isn't really that long of a time period, and Nintendo feels the game has maintained its value. If you disagree, just don't buy it. Maybe these price drops are a good thing for the consumer, but maybe only in the short term. Dropping game prices so much and so quickly after release incentivizes waiting. And maybe that's a bad thing for the industry as a whole because they don't get to make as much money. Maybe it's a good thing I got to play 2 games I didn't really care about, but the more people choose to wait, the closer to collapse the industry gets. Maybe a game dropping to 25% of its full price 2 years after launch is unfair to early adopters. Also, these games are new IPs. Zelda is a known entity. You know what you're getting with a Zelda game, even the open world Breath of the Wild. So, if you're not buying it at launch, when are you buying it? Maybe it's just not for you. Your sentimental thoughts about Nintendo saving video games after the 1983 crash isn't a valid rebuttal for people who dislike Nintendo hardware. It wasn't intended as such. You may have conflated 2 separate points I made while I was just giving some history. I was only pointing out the fact that Nintendo saved the industry and has innovated in this gaming space. And for this, I give them some respect. I suppose it is possible for a company that has earned some goodwill in the past to piss away that goodwill in the present, but people have been hating on Nintendo since long before they started making weak consoles and doing anti-consumerism in the age of the internet. People hold Nintendo to a higher standard than other companies. I can love Nintendo's game design while also not being blind to the fact that their hardware since the Wii era has been severely underpowered. If my TV can handle 4K 120 FPS, it does indeed suck that my Nintendo console is barely capable of doing 720p 30 FPS in many/most games. I'd love to play them on PC where there'll be no technical limitations that keep me from enjoying the game design. First, the idea that in the realm of PC gaming, there are no technical limitations is ridiculous. He'll probably try to comment something like, "That's not what I said," but that's literally what you just said here. Second, higher resolution and frame rate is nice, but it's not the end-all be-all of gaming. Nintendo makes games that are fun, regardless of limitation. Third, if Nintendo makes a console that matches your 4K 120 FPS monitor, should I be pissed that they haven't matched my 1440p 240 FPS monitor? How bespoke do you want a console to be? Also, I don't know if you know this, maybe they didn't tell you over there, but I got some good news. Nintendo has just released a much more powerful console. So gaming as Link or Mario in 720p, 30 frames a second is most likely a thing of the past. You should be happy, but you aren't for some reason. Nintendo decided to leave the console power arms race a long time ago, and if you look at power, it doesn't always relate to success anyway. The Wii and the Switch were very underpowered, but they've been Nintendo's most successful consoles. Microsoft tends to make the most powerful consoles, yet they're in third place. People bash Nintendo for making weak consoles, but now Nintendo has made a more powerful console, and people are moaning it costs too much. Nintendo can't win. You literally don't know your blind spots with the PS4 Pro. Spoiler, he never tells me my blind spots with the PS4 Pro. I'm glad you are satisfied with your base PS4. I bought a PS4 Pro. So let's play a clip from the last video. For those of you crying about how Nintendo is setting a precedent with the price of the Switch 2 in games, if you bought a PS4 Pro, a PS5 Pro, or a PlayStation Portal, you need to sit the fuck down and shut up. So he's one of the people I told to sit the fuck down and shut up. I bought a PS4 Pro because it allows me to run certain games at 60 FPS that your base PS4 couldn't. In fact, do you know what precedent was started with the PS4 Pro and continues to be used by base consoles like the PS5? The choice between quality and performance modes. Definitely one of the best things that has happened on consoles. Why? What's so great about this? What choices are we really getting here? You can play a good-looking game at 30 FPS or an imperceptibly less good-looking game at 60. Most people are going to choose 60 anyway. Why not just make the game run optimally on the console? Whatever. Hey, the option's there for those who want it. But you can get all the gaming performance options you want to from your magically limitless gaming PC. Let me choose high frame rate if I don't care for your ray tracing nonsense. That makes the game run so dirty. He keeps on putting these very dismissive yours in the comment. I'm glad you were satisfied with your base PS4. Let me choose high frame rate if I don't care for your ray tracing nonsense. Make the game run so dirty. Why is it mine? You're the one on here crying about fidelity. I've been happily playing the underpowered Switch for the past 8 years. Ridiculous. Anyway, so from reading this comment, which this person posted later, I'm going to go ahead and assume that my blind spot with the PS4 is that I'm shitting on the existence of these Pro consoles while being a fan of the Switch 2, which itself is just a Pro console. If this is what this person means by writing this part of the comment, then this person has completely failed in two regards. Number one, the Switch 2 is obviously not just a Switch Pro. I've already explained that by referencing power and game exclusivity. And number two, I'm not shitting on the existence of these Pro consoles. I'm shitting on the people buying them while complaining about the price of the Switch 2. I guess if I have to try to extract some constructive feedback out of this comment, I guess I could say that, without intending to, you made me realize I should have name-dropped GTA 6 to make this point more clear. Let me explain. Before Nintendo announced Switch 2 pricing on April 2nd, Sony and Microsoft had already started releasing games at higher prices than games from last gen and even earlier this gen. Here's an article from January about how some in the industry hoped that GTA 6 would be more expensive and that would normalize higher game prices in general. Yet when Nintendo announced its pricing, people online started screaming, "Now all game prices are going up," or "Now GTA 6 is going to be over $100," as if this would be Nintendo's fault, that Nintendo was setting a precedent with these prices. How can Nintendo be responsible for pricing trends that began before they announced Switch 2 pricing? I shouldn't have had to spell this out for you like this, but here goes. There are no games exclusive to the PS4 Pro that don't run on the base PS4. You're getting the same experience, but with slightly better frame rate or resolution. From what I recall, God of War 2018, a game you name dropped, runs at 1080p 30 FPS on base PS4. It runs at either 4K 30 or 1080p 60 on PS4 Pro, but on PS5, it runs 4K 60. If you had just waited, you would have gotten much better performance from your PS4 games, and you could have saved a lot of money. The precedent set by Sony and Microsoft in making these Pro consoles is that they've normalized spending more money for incredibly minor spec bumps. If you bought a PS4, PS4 Pro, PS5, and PS5 Pro, then you spent 4 consoles worth of money on 2 consoles, all of which, if you do some inflation math, are more expensive than the Switch 2. I never said that these Pro iterations shouldn't be made available for those who want the option, but it's hypocritical to invoke the cost of living to shit on Nintendo for their pricing when you're willing to spend that much or more for consoles you absolutely do not need. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.